What's something that was designed for the use of one sex but is now predominantly used by the other? Birth colors were originally swapped, with soft blue representing femininity and a deep pink to represent masculinity. Midol was marketed as non-gender specific headache medication when it was first created. Decades later they changed to marketing it specifically for treating menstrual cramps and bloating. Computer programming was a job originally intended for women. Shaving razors were made for men, but women shave a good bit more now, both in frequency and surface area. Victoria's Secret was originally supposed to be a place for men to buy lingerie for their wives and not feel embarrassed, but now it's almost exclusively shopped at by women. Yoga, only for men. Now it's just women. It's still for everybody, just so happens to be like 98% women. Cigarettes. They were designed for women, to be a more feminine version of a cigar. The name, literally, cigarette, like bachelorette. DHT cream. They sell it for use as penis-enlarging cream, which it doesn't do because men already have high levels of DHT in their bloodstream. However, it does actually make clits permanently larger. Yoga. It was invented by men for men, but for some reason it's mostly women who gravitate towards it, at least in the West. Many men are too afraid to try it, which is a shame because yoga is enjoyable. I really enjoy it and it has a lot of benefits. Old Spice was launched by Schulten Inc. in 1937. William Lightfoot Schultz was inspired by his mother's potpourri, and as a result, the first Old Spice product in 1937 was a woman's scent called Early American Old Spice. The product was received well, and therefore followed with Old Spice for Men in 1938. Playgirl. The magazine was founded in 1973 and was supposed to be intended and was marketed as such to women. However, gay men became the most dominant consumer of the magazine. Can confirm. In middle school, a friend brought a Playgirl to school to show off to us girls. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. We had no idea it really existed. You go to the convenience store and all the racks have nude mags for men, so we were in awe, but we really spent the whole time giggling and going EW, so pretty much the same effect as dick pics today. Nothing enticing about them, except the Big Daddy Kane and Shawn Michaels issues. Anyway, and then we were like, wait, where did you find this? She said her brother had it. We thought nothing of it, until years later, when he came out. My hoodie apparently. Filtered cigarettes in general, but Marlboro made the biggest leap in terms of gendered marketing. Once that whole conspiracy theory came out that like cigarettes are, I don't know, bad for you or something, and more people switched to filtered cigarettes. It's filtered, that means it's good for you. Was around the time that the Salt of the Earth classic American Marlboro Man came into existence, trying to distance the brand from its previously woman-focused advertisements. High-heeled shoes. No, seriously, shoes with high heels were originally developed by Persian cavalry, as the heels helped their feet stay in the stirrups while they rode and fired arrows. In the West, women wore platform shoes to gain height. Catherine de' Medici is the first European woman recorded to have worn heels, in the late 1500s, but heels wouldn't come into the general European fashion consciousness for another 200 or so years, and the trend of women wearing any kind of height-enhancing shoes died with her. In the 1600s, when the Persian Shah sent an envoy of soldiers to Russia, Spain, and Germany to form diplomatic relations, aristocratic European men started emulating the Persian soldiers' footwear. By the time of King Louis XIV's reign in the mid-1600s, high heels were very popular among the male aristocracy, as were stockings. In fact, Louis would only allow favored members of his court to wear heels, and especially to wear certain colored heels. A red heel on a shoe was a big deal, as it was a sign of power. You can look at old paintings of the era and actually see who held the king's favor by the kind of shoes they were wearing. Anyone else caught wearing such footwear could risk having their head chopped off. The irony of this would take a little over a century to play out. In the mid-1700s, men wearing heels would start to fall out of fashion, as they began to become more feminized with the advent of women's shoes starting to grow heels of their own. The French Revolution is what really killed the male high-heeled shoe trend, as any man wearing one was part of the aristocracy, and likely to lose their head. Ultimately, if you wanted to avoid losing height from the top, you had to lose height from the bottom. Best not to dig your heels in on this fashion trend. Is this how Family Feud gets new questions and answers? Ugg boots were originally worn by male surfers, with their girlfriends stealing and wearing them like they would a leather jacket. I have been educated by my Aussie friends that they're worn by all down under, as slippers and such. I was speaking of their history here in the US, where they were mostly introduced by surfers on the West Coast and now they are almost exclusively worn by women here. Those leg stirrups they use at the gynecologist were invented for removing kidney bladder stones in men. They used to cut from below the testicles and cut right through the prostate. It had a very low survival rate and was not approved by the medical profession. The original Hippocratic Oath had a section on not cutting for stone, meaning they swore not to surgically remove the stones because of it. They later removed that section of the oath. Otherwise a bunch of urologists would be out of a job. Bladder stones, not kidney stones. To get to a kidney stone through the taint you would be elbow deep in the patient. I believe you just found the reason the survival rate was so low. Skirts used to be worn in battle by men for more room to move around. Names like Ashley, Kim, Beverly, Addison, Shelby, etc. used to be boys' names. Now are mostly girls. I hope eventually people can just pick the name they like without worrying about which gender is using it more. Boys are going to run out of names otherwise. The Ford Mustang. It was supposed to be a car with a big trunk so you could fit all the groceries in it. There was even an ad or article stating that you can own a Mustang that matches the color of your lipstick. Makes sense why a lot of old Mustangs are red. Not literally sex related, but I'd say the MLP fandom, made for little dainty girls, used by old fat guys. Hey, stop excluding the skinny old guys and the young fat guys. Pink and blue were originally considered colors for boys and girls, respectively. Fedoras and trilby hats. Both hats are named for the fictional women who wore them. Now they're worn by gross neckbeards in combination with the cheapest black leather duster and katana they can afford. Crop tops. A football thing, initially. Adam's rib bone. I glanced over and misread the title as what's something that was designed for sex but is now used for something else. A woman was supposed to hold the door for a man so he could check for any dangers in the building. The thought was mainly for married couples, but it could be done to a total stranger as well. At some point it flipped and turned to just being a polite thing to do. The theory I heard was that women began to enter first to make sure the man didn't have any enemies in the room because they wouldn't shoot her. Something related to the mafia. I remember reading somewhere that Kleenex was made for ladies to remove their makeup, but their husbands were blowing their noses in them, and now we all blow our noses in them. That's not all I blow in them. Get a load of this guy. Most fashion inspired by military uniforms, mostly men, are usually worn by women. Combat boots, epaulettes on shoulders, olive drab jackets, berets, etc. It seems predominantly isn't quite understood in its meaning. Wristwatches. They were made because most women didn't have pockets for pocket watches. Now I pretty much just see men wear them, though they've started to fall out of style. Makeup. Also primarily worn by wealthy men back in the day. Purses. Back in the day all the men carried their coinage in a purse, although it's making a comeback for modern dudes. It's not a purse, it's a satchel. Indiana Jones had one. Hitachi Magic Wand. It was originally manufactured for relieving tension and relaxing sore muscles, often used by athletes, but now is famous for its use as a sex toy, industrial strength vibrator. And now they relieve tension and relax the whole body instead of one muscle. Upgrades people. Upgrades. Leggings. In the early Renaissance, young, fashionable men just stopped wearing their skirts, robes. The old, religious men were absolutely scandalized. Sounds familiar. No. Heels if I remember correctly. That's correct. High heels were originally made for butchers to wear who were mostly men so that they could keep their feet clean of any blood from slaughtering animals. It's worth pointing out that, while this is true, they were more of the block heel type. You know, for anyone who's now thinking of ancient Egyptian butchers walking around wearing black leather f***y stilettos. I might have a new fetish. I have a good example that's unfortunately about 100 years old. Back during the World War, tampons were commonly found in medkits for soldiers due to a need for bandages etc. I have discovered that using tampons for bullet wounds has occurred back to the 18th century. Also, I know this isn't quite predominantly, just thought it was a kinda neat fact. Top knots. Automatic cars they were made for women because it was believed women couldn't or wouldn't be able to use a stick shift, that it was too complicated for them. My ex-girlfriend had to deal with that shit a lot. She worked at a place that loaded cars onto trains and people would tell her, "That car is a manual. We'll get someone else to move it, shed, just grab the keys, hop in and say, why," before driving off. Every car Shush has ever owned has been a manual. Shush is a pro. This must be in North America. In most parts of the world everyone at least learns on a manual transmission. I know that in the UK if you take the test in an automatic you have to retake it in a manual if you want to drive them. My mum and I got into an argument about this when I wanted to rent a car in the UK since I only had a US license, and she assumed that meant I could only drive an automatic. Nope, mum. I learned in a manual. Your manual. Not specifically for one gender, but maxi pads came about because nurses in World War I started using the wound packing pads for their periods. Prior to that, women mainly used homemade washable rags. Computers. Tedious computing and calculating was seen as women's work through the 1940s.